Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining today's panel today to answer your burning questions of psychosocial safety. My name is Cassie Bolter, and I'm the Events and Partnership Manager here at Sentis. Before we get underway, I just wanted to do an acknowledgement of country. Sentis acknowledges the traditional custodians throughout Australia and recognises their connections to land, waters and community. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today and pay our respects to the elders past and present. We extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today, and we do this because we value Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history, culture and knowledge. On our panel from Sentis, I'd like to introduce Thiele Armit, Organisational Psychologist, Ben Carnell, Head of Client Solutions, Dr. Amy Hawkes, Head of Psychology, and Dr. Vanessa Thiele, our Positive Safety Specialist, who are looking forward to having a chat and answering some of your questions today. We'll start off with some of the great questions that people have sent through prior, and if you have any other questions, please put them into the Q&A box and we'll get to as many as we can do today. Over to our lovely panel.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Cassie, and thank you very much, everyone, for jumping on this webinar, on this discussion today, probably more so. So a little bit different to our normal format. What we've been discussing over the last little while is looking at how can we provide different sorts of insight to those that tune in to some of our webinars and some of our content. And so today we thought we'd do something a little bit different by means of having an open conversation, an open discussion. In many ways, these conversations and discussions are things that we're having internally and with a lot of clients. And so, from our end, it was, well, let's actually open that up a little bit and get some other people onto that conversation as well. We've already had some great questions come through, and the four of us have been discussing those already. So we'll go off on some different tangents in today's session and discuss a whole range of different topics as well. For those that aren't familiar with Sentis, we are a safety culture consulting business. We are based here in Brisbane, but work with clients right around the world, actually, but a lot in Australia and New Zealand. Been around for a bit over 20 years now, which is pretty exciting, in a range of different industries. Where we're seeing things shift over the last little while, and is certainly more to looking at not just physical safety, but looking at what psychosocial safety looks like in an organisational context as well. It's not a new thing, but for a lot of organisations, it is, or it feels like a new thing. Certainly with here in Australia, some of the regulatory changes earlier on this year as well. We're having lots of conversations with clients around what psychosocial safety is, what it isn't, how to best tackle it, how to best not tackle it as well, and starting to see organisations learning from each other, as well as us being part of those conversations as well. A big part of how we work with organisations is looking at how do we actually create these moments, as you can see on the screen here, for individuals within an organisation. So looking at what does that look like at an individual level, but systemically, what does that look like across the organisation to facilitate these sorts of moments when people finish work for the day as well. Obviously from a physical safety perspective, but certainly from a psychosocial safety perspective as well. So we'll jump into a range of different questions, and go down different rabbit warrens, I'm sure, and have different questions that pop up. Feel free to throw some questions in there as well. So we will be looking at that and monitoring that, and going off on different directions as we go. But I might throw to one of the questions that sort of jumped to the top of our list there very quickly, and Vanessa, I might throw to yourself if that's right. There's different terminologies that are thrown around. There's psychosocial safety, there's psychological safety. They often get used interchangeably. There's psychological health and safety. There's mental health. There's well-being. There's more titles, I think, given to the same thing, and they are quite different, but they're often used interchangeably, not necessarily in the right format. But when we talk about a mentally healthy workplace, what from your end, how would you go about describing what a mentally healthy workplace is?
Look, you're right, there are lots of different ways to describe it, but the way I look at it, most people are familiar with the concept that health is more than just the absence of disease. And in the same vein, a mentally healthy workplace or a psychosocially safe workplace is more than just the absence of bullying and harassment, stress and burnout. It's actually about people having the capacity and capability to really thrive and do their best work. And So when we think about, what is it that actually sets people up for success in that way and enables them to do their best work, we actually have a model called the safety experience model, and that actually looks at the different dimensions of our experience of the workplace. And for lots of us from a traditional safety background where we might do high risk work, we often focus on that physical lens or physical dimension of safety. And there certainly is that. So, my physical experience of work might be that I work in an underground mine for 12-hour shifts, for 2 weeks in a row. It could be that I'm out on the road driving to different clients all day long. It could be that I work within an office, an open plan office with very little windows and not much fresh air. So that's our physical dimensions of our work and the tasks that we do. There's also the social dimension of work, and that involves how we interact with and relate with the people around us. So my feeling of being within my team, connection to colleagues, my leader, direct reports, even people wider across the business that I connect with. So that social domain is about trust and collaboration, communication, that feeling of belongingness that I have in my team and my workplace. And then there's also the psychological dimension of my work experience. So that involves my own sense of well-being, resilience, but there's also many work factors and things that we now recognize as psychosocial hazards, for instance. So the pressure I have in my role, my job clarity, all of these sorts of elements affect my perception of stress, which would fit into that psychological dimension. So we actually have these three dimensions: physical, social, and psychological experiences of the workplace. And generally, when our experience of the workplace are generally positive, that's when, from a neuroscience perspective, we will feel safe, well, and engaged. So I'll have that feeling of physical and social safety within my role and my workplace. I'll be well in terms of feeling that I have the capacity to meet the demands of my job and my role. And also I'll feel engaged, which means I'm feeling energized and motivated and committed to people and to purpose. So, yeah, and that's what we really want. Just imagine for a moment if most of your workforce were in that space of being safe, well, and engaged. That's when we can set our organizations up to thrive. I'm interested, though, that's my perspective. Are there any other thoughts on what is a psychosocially safe, mentally healthy workplace?
I was just going to actually pick up, and Amy, Tia, interested in your thoughts as well, is the word you used quite a bit there, actually, Vanessa, is that word experience, is what's the experience. And I really like that word because it encompasses what the physical, what the psychological, what the social aspect of safety is what is it like for people just to come to work, and understanding what that looks like, beyond the processes and structures and those sorts of things that might be in place, is when people come to the workplace, what is that experience of being in or being at the workplace like for them as well. And I think for a lot of leaders, just understanding that part is a really critical part as well. I mean, we all know that show of Undercover Boss, I think it was called, from memory, and yeah, a good little TV show of sorts, so not really a reality TV show, but of sorts. But it gave a good insight for leaders to say, what's the experience of like for people in how they get their job done, how they come to work, how they experience work as well.
Mm.
Amy, Tia, any thoughts from your end?
I think you've done a wonderful job explaining the three: physical, social, psychological experiences. And I think it's a really useful way to start unpacking this space, because it can feel a little bit overwhelming, and it can feel like there's a lot of different hazards, and there's a lot of different processes we need to think about and be aware of and take our organizations through. And we're trying to deal with these new regulations and these new expectations that we have on our businesses. So I think it can really be helpful to start to compartmentalize it, as you were saying, Ben, into that day-to-day experience, that physical side, the social side, the psychological side. And it can I think the other really nice thing about the way you explained it, Vanessa, was that focus on what does it feel like when things are going well? What does it feel like when we're in that space of thriving, of being safe, well, and engaged, were the words that you used before. And I think that's such an important part of this, because we're not just trying to avoid problems, we're also trying to create that workforce and that work environment that really is at that positive end as well. Yeah. Cool.
I think that's actually, whenever we throw legislation around something, I think that is a trap that we can fall into, is we're trying to avoid getting in trouble for the bad stuff. So there tends to be a focus on, eradicating bullying, harassment, and ensuring that our inclusion and diversity stuff is up to scratch, which is all great and needs to happen, obviously. But we forget there's a whole other side of the spectrum, and that's where all the great stuff happens, So leaning into this psychosocial space is not just about avoiding all the negatives, but if we really invest in that, think about what the tangible positive results are when people are feeling, connected and seen and respected, and, that people actually care about their physical experience of the workplace and all of that sort of thing, that it opens up a whole new potential for organizations to really thrive.
Absolutely.
There's a word I think you used before, Amy, I think it might have been yourself, around it being, maybe if you didn't, I'll ask anyway, in terms of it being overwhelming for a lot of leaders, and I think particularly senior leaders. Why is that, this space, when we talk about creating mentally healthy workplaces? Why is it? Now, what helps create that sense of being overwhelmed by trying to understand this space, and then look at how we go about targeting? Amy, I'm interested probably in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think we have to acknowledge that it's been part of the legislation, the Workplace Health and Safety Act, since 2011, that we are required to provide both a physical and psychologically safe work environment for our employees. I think what's changed more recently is more detail around the regulatory process, the inspections, the assessment, the controls that you're going to have in place need to be much more explicit and worked through within each organization. And I think that's been what we'll see eventually is that's been a really important shift in the way we're thinking about it, because otherwise there is that kind of opportunity for people to go, well, I don't really know what or how to do that. So I think we're seeing this massive shift in terms of people seeking information, seeking to educate themselves. And I probably would add that there's just so many resources out there. There are so many tools. This is not, while it can feel a new area, this is an area that's had decades of research into workplace health, occupational health, stress and well-being. So there is a lot of information out there to get your head around. But the way to flip that around is there's a lot of information out there to support you and help you to get the right plans in place. So I think it can feel overwhelming, but I think the best way to think about it is that this is something that has had a lot of research and a lot of time and a lot of energy put into it. And there's a lot of good information out there and a lot of people out there that can help you. So I think if we focus on that side, and it's about educating yourself, which is why it's so fantastic to have these opportunities to record conversations like this and get more information out there. But yeah, I think that's probably my answer for you, Ben.
Yeah. And how do you think, and Vanessa and Thiele, interested in your thoughts on this as well, is how there is a lot of information out there. There's good, there's bad, and in some contexts there's probably the ugly as well, but both in terms of information, but your solutions, your interventions, your approaches, how to tackle something, how not to tackle something. How do organizations, how do stakeholders go about working out what's the good, what's the bad, what do they need to pick up, and what do they need to take from that information, and what information should they be not giving too much weight to?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of that is, starting off with understanding what's happening in your organization so that you know what you're looking for, what resources to draw on. So in this space, especially because it's so complex, like what we were talking about, there's the physical, social, psychological experience, and they all interact with each other, and people experience things very differently. So I think that also adds a layer of complexity that it can be easy to shy away from. So it's really about that importance of assessment and diagnosis at the start and consulting with your people, because otherwise you're not really going to have that big picture understanding of what's going on, and then that can help with working out the next steps from there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it is a tricky thing for organizations to think about. I think the difference, as we know, the difference between physical risks and hazards and psychosocial ones is that psychosocial risk is really in the eye of the beholder. Psyche is a felt experience, and there's not necessarily going to be one rule that works for everyone. I was actually listening to a podcast the other day where they were discussing work hours and at what point, how many work hours is too many in terms of our well-being. And the thing is, we can have some rough guidelines. 38 to 40 hours seems to be about right for most people. However, it really depends on so many things. You could have someone needing to do a bit of overtime, say they're working up to 45, 50 hours. It could be that for that person, when we take in the understanding of the experience and what is the context of that, it might be that person is at the end of a really exciting project that they've been working on. They've got sort of, a month of big push to get this over the line, but they have a fantastic team. They're really connected to the meaning and purpose in that project. They've got some great leadership that's really aware that they're doing a lot of overtime and has been very supportive. In that context, that person could be really thriving. But 40 hours, 45, 50 hours for someone else who, hates what they're doing, they don't know when this period of overtime is ever going to end. Maybe they have some conflict with someone that they have to work closely with. It's an entirely different experience. And that's why I think we can try to find easy solutions too quickly, and that's where we tend to go to putting in place sort of admin controls, policies, and we'll just make everyone have to do a maximum 40 hours. But that is not really leaning into those nuances of that psychosocial element for people. So that's the thing. This is why I think it's so important to actually understand the experience of the workers and actually consult with them and get them involved, because we're not going to be able to just have an easy, this one approach works for everyone.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, V, in terms of I can see a lot of organisations, some organisations, that are looking to do something in this space, almost to sort of kickstart to show that, we're doing something in this space, and we're recognising that we're not trying to eat the whole elephant at a time. We're going to start with something small, but that something small, or that initial piece, may not be the best thing to do, or it might be, even in some cases, appear superficial and can actually be damaging in a way as well. So, what I mean by this is that an organisation might go, look, we've got a budget dedicated towards this space, and we're going to, and I'm making up a generic example here, is that in the interests of building mental health and well-being, we're going to build that collaboration and the team coming together. And so every Friday we're going to organise a lunch, where the team all comes together, and whatever that might look like, barbecue on site, in the office, whatever it might be. Yeah, great, wonderful, and maybe there's budget then that goes into doing that, but that might not actually be something that's going to shift the experience. And I'd probably go so far as to say is not going to really shift the experience for most people involved in whatever that might look like as well, because the rest of the week they're still not having that positive experience of work. There's a fair chunk that they're going to be having that negative experience of work. So I think the challenge for organisations is avoiding those sorts of things, and that's a very sort of generic example. Not so much for that intervention, but what it means for other controls or other things that might be done later on, because, you know, if that doesn't have any impact, which it's likely to not necessarily have any impact, it's been one of those things that, yeah, it's made us feel all good and positive and patting each other on the back and et cetera, but it hasn't actually had any meaningful impact for the individuals or the organisation as a whole. So then when you get to going and looking at, okay, well, what are we going to do next, or what's the next, you know, risk area that we need to go and target? There's a real risk that it's going to be tarnished by, you know, the intervention that had very little impact and was rather superficial at the start as well. So I think for organisations, it's in some contexts pumping the brakes a little bit to go, how well do we really understand what the risks are, how those risks differ between people, what the experience is like across our different teams, and then looking at what are the controls that we need to put in place, what are the things that we need to do differently that is going to have an impact, and then start to build that momentum of shifting what that psychosocial safety culture looks like as well. I know, and we're all familiar with this. I'm sure a few people on the call are familiar with this as well. But one of the things that we know is that for people in a workplace, and this has come a lot from our diagnostics, and Thiele, I'd be interested in your thoughts around this, is that about 1/3, I think 32% of people are finding that work has a negative impact upon their well-being. So about a third of people in all organisations that we've worked with are finding that work negatively impacts upon their well-being. So when we say that, what do we mean by that in terms of negatively impacting their well-being?
Yeah, so that means that, you know, what they're experiencing at work in terms of that physical, psychosocial safety, that's having an impact on their personal life. They're bringing stuff home, and yeah, they're experiencing all sorts of kind of personal health costs essentially. But for the organisation, the impact is actually huge as well. And we did touch on this a little bit earlier. And, you know, if people are getting that negative impact in terms of their personal health, they're less likely to be engaged and productive. You're more likely to get presenteeism and absenteeism, you know, more turnover and so on. So there's real costs for the organisation. And as we were discussing before, it's also that missed opportunity for the organisation to achieve those really positive outcomes when they are thriving and there's positive psychosocial experiences happening as well. So, yeah.
Can I use that to jump into a couple of questions that have come in? Is if someone was asking, are we sort of being too soft with our new approach to safety? Just wait till I get on my podium. And you know, and there's another question around how do we sort of raise the importance of psychosocial safety with leaders. So I guess there's people are feeling that there's a bit of challenge to, you know, why do we need to do this, particularly in those industries that have been very physical safety driven. And I totally get that. But I guess we can look at psychosocial risk in a couple of different ways. First of all, the psychosocial elements or factors actually interact with our physical safety. So, you know, take you work in a high risk industry, you might have two workers that do exactly the same work. One person, you know, Terry has a great leader who's very supportive, gives you know, feedback to and coaching to the group, also gives recognition where it's due. There's really good relationships and banter across the team. In fact, they feel comfortable to call each other out and have a bit of a go at each other if someone's forgotten a safety process or whatever it might be. In that group, you know, Terry feels quite confident to ask questions or to challenge or you know, whatever. And that's very different than his colleague in the other team who has a leader who perhaps never gives positive feedback, always seems to be on the warpath. Everyone's walking on eggshells, trying not to be the one that gets called out. There could be competition in that team and, you know, difficult relationships. And so that person wants to keep their head down. They don't want to do anything that causes them to be vulnerable, like asking questions, showing that they don't know something, or, you know, God forbid, having to own up to being, you know, near miss or something like that. you know, in these industries that are very sort of physical safety dominated, when incidents are investigated, we tend to drill down to, you know, it's always a human error that is the underlying cause, right? Well, in which team are we more likely to see human errors? You know, so our psychosocial factors and the experience, that psychological and social experience of the workplace, is actually going to interact with our ability to stay safe, follow procedures, and also it's going to impact our sort of desire to give more and display organisational and safety citizenship behaviours. And so there's that element. So being aware of and really leaning into the psychosocial hazards and risks is important to actually keep ourselves physically safe. But then there's also psychosocial risks just on their own. So the thing is that people's expectations of work has shifted. It is currently shifting, but it already has shifted. People actually want to, and they feel that they deserve to work in a place where they feel, you know, connected to meaning and purpose, where they feel valued. They want to feel a sense of belongingness. They want to bring them whole selves to work, and they want to be set up for success. They want to be challenged and trained and have opportunity. And the thing is, if we don't lean into this understanding the experience of the worker, if we think that that's kind of soft to do that, then what's the impact on our organizations? You know, there's I remember reading the Gallup studies even many years ago, and it talks about that bell curve of engagement. And you've got maybe 20% of people that are highly engaged. You've got 60% of people that just turn up and do their work, but maybe don't do a whole lot extra. And you've got maybe 20 people who are highly disengaged. Now, the highly engaged people, they're probably your top performers. They're the people that give extra and do more. Now, those people probably have options, right? Because they're great workers. So if we don't invest in becoming a great place to work, those people will leave and find another opportunity, a better opportunity. And so what happens to your organizational culture? I mean, this is where organizations can rot from the inside out in 12 months. If that 20% of your best people start leaving, there's a big problem there. And so I just think that leaning into psychosocial safety, becoming a great place to work, is not soft, it's actually smart business. And that's my TED talk. Thanks for coming.
It's such a good point, Vanessa, because, you know, we're talking with a lot of executives, and even just recently in the last week, a lot of executives, a lot of boards here in Australia, but likewise overseas, and it's worrying to see some of the responses from some of these groups. Some going, well, you know, in our country, it's not legislation here, so we'll wait until it is before we start worrying about that stuff. Or it is the, you know, it's the soft stuff, or it's the, you know, it's the unicorns dancing, you know, through the rainbow, and those sort of descriptors of what this psychosocial space is. And it's probably a frustrating conversation experience in a lot of ways, because getting and I know that a lot of stakeholders, some that are on the call, and likewise people that we're talking to, are finding that challenging, because those executives and those boards is they have really sort of two choices. Is one is, okay, we need to understand what the experience is and try and create that positive experience for people in the workplace. That's our first option. Or the second option is that we're going to have to deal with really the fallout or the outcomes, the repercussions in some ways of not doing that. And so to your point there, Vanessa, is either we create that experience and that positive safety experience for people in the workplace, or people are going to be leaving. We're not going to necessarily know why they're leaving. You know, people are going to be disengaging, high levels of burnout, and we're still going to have to deal with those outcomes as an executive, as a board, just as much as well.
Totally agree. I think you said it really well, Vanessa. And for those people that because we did have quite a few questions, and I think quite a few people who were coming up against that same problem, Ben, around how do we get people to understand why this is important. I think the more you can focus on those benefits of doing this well, that helps the story. think Vanessa made a really good point there at the start around the impact between your psychosocial safety and your physical safety outcomes. So if you are in an organisation that has a strong emphasis on physical safety metrics, then talking about that overlap might help bring people on that journey. And then, you know, I think some of it's just good common sense stuff. And a lot of it organisations are probably already doing. And it's about recognising what you're already doing well, calling out those successes, linking it to outcomes that you might not have thought about in the past, and continuing that good work that's already there. It's coming for me into one of the other questions that we get asked quite a bit, and it's come through on this Q&A as well, is that overlap between the HR side of this and the safety, health, environment, the safety professional side of this. So Ben, I'll throw that one to you and see what you think about the best way to get that engagement between those two groups in an organisation.
Between the executive and the
HR side.
Oh, sorry, between HR and
Yep.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It varies quite a bit from organisation to organisation, because in some organisations, neither party really wants to jump into this space. In other organisations, both parties want to jump into this space, and in other organisations, it's sort of both parties want to be involved, but they want to look after their turf in it. You know, in terms of understanding the risk profile, you know, typically that's probably going to sit with your safety department, with your safety team. And then once you understand those risks, then looking at, well, what are the controls that we need to put in place? That's where HR is probably going to have a lot more involvement in that space as well. Not mutually exclusive. There's going to be some overlap there as well. I think the opportunity for organisations is, and coming back a little bit to what we're talking around the role of the board and the executive, is to make sure that it's a priority at that level. And then as that then cascades down, is that then the safety team and the HR team, or whatever title they may adopt within the organisation, are then playing roles within that strategy to address that particular priority, rather than it sitting on this, maybe strategic plan or whatever that might look like within the safety team or within the HR team, and there's no sort of overarching priority that they align to. And so I think it comes back to making sure that it is a priority at the executive level, and at the board level, and that then that cascades down. That is going to help make sure that those two departments or those two functions within a business are aligned in working towards the same outcome, rather than, reluctant to use the word turf wars, but in some organisations, probably those with a lower maturity level from a safety culture perspective, that's a risk. So making sure that it is that priority at a higher level as well. And both departments have got they both bring a lot of strengths in terms of the thinking, the lens they're going to look through in understanding what psychosocial safety is. And so being open to learning from each other is going to be a really critical thing as well. And I've certainly seen lots of organisations where that's not the case, and it's sort of one of those departments. Often both sort of want to be top of the ladder and sort of prove their self and what they're doing is right. We're all trying to achieve the same outcome, and so I think that's the important part to keep in the back of your mind as well. I look at even our client portfolio, and often, we might, as an example, we'll be talking to an organisation, supporting them around what their critical risk management might look like. And then once we start to go into, something that is around their psychosocial safety and starting to look at mental well-being, etc., it very quickly goes, I'll bring in HR who'll be able to talk to that. And so you can see quite clearly there's this divide between the two. Those organisations are doing it well is where there's just such this interconnectedness between those two departments, and both are involved in the conversation, both are supporting each other, both are aligned and trying to achieve the same sort of strategic objectives within that space as well.
Yeah, really good point, Ben. It's relates really well to that idea of how we can get our leaders more actively engaged in this psychosocial side. Like you said, the organizations that are doing it well, it's across the board. And I think that's where you see leaders have embraced this approach and they're able to talk to it really well. And I know, Thiele, you probably got a good sense of some of the ways that we can support leaders to be able to step into this space. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, we've talked about in the past, you know, how integral leaders are, and that's definitely the case. They are, you know, probably one of the top influences in that psychosocial safety space. But the thing that we have to keep in mind with that is that there's a lot of, you know, responsibility and accountability placed on leaders because of that. And we need to make sure that we're looking after them as well. So they may feel like a bit like the piggy in the middle sometimes. They have all these expectations, and they're also trying to look after their team. So we need to make sure that they're supported well with tools and resources, you know, managing their own stress and emotions, you know, how to have a supportive conversation with the worker, how to resolve conflict, you know, how to have an effective performance management conversation, things like that. So yeah, it's really important that leaders have that under their belt so that they're not being exposed to this, you know, the psychosocial risks themselves as well. So yeah.
It's such a, that leadership capability piece is such a critical piece in you know, what organisations are doing in this space and what organisations are going to continue to do in this space as well, because and we know this, we've spoken about this many times, that the risk profile of psychosocial risks is so different to what it is for physical risks. You know, if someone's working from a height, as we know the risk that's, you know, that's involved with, you know, operating around that hazard. So there's particular controls that we put in place, and those controls are going to be uniform for everyone, because the impact of falling from a height is going to always be the same negative outcome. It's going to be immediate. It's going to be the same for everybody. Whereas exposure to a particular psychosocial hazard in the workplace is going to be different from individual to individual, is that it's going to, it's not going to be a risk necessarily for everyone. And, you know, the exposure to that risk, you know, let's say it's working in isolation as an example, some people are going to thrive in that environment, and some people are going to find that a really stressful experience. The impact of that is not going to be immediate, like a fall from height. It is going to, you know, sometimes it's going to be years down the track before that has an impact as well. And to my earlier point, it's not always negative. Sometimes that can be positive as well. And so the opportunity for organisations is looking at, yeah, there's controls that we can put in place at a systematic level, but making sure that leaders have the capability, the skills, that the nous to be able to go, okay, I've got two team members here, and this one's experiencing work in this way, and this one's experiencing work in this way. There's no uniform control we can put in place there. The leader's going to play a key role in being able to go, okay, this is how we've got to support, or I've got to support this person, and we've got to support this person. Then for this person, this is how we've got to support and shift that experience as well. So it's, yeah, we know the impact of leadership on well-being is, yeah, as clear as day. So yeah, it's such a key opportunity area.
Yeah, I'd really like to riff off that idea of Thiele's, that, you know, we need to support leaders. There is a lot on their shoulders in terms of creating a psychosocially safe environment for their team. But they do need to really be empowered and given the capability and capacity for that. Little plug, I've been writing a book that's coming out next year on positive safety, and in the process of that I've been interviewing some fantastic people who are doing great work, brilliant work in the area of safety. And what I really noticed is there's a real theme that these people who are able to go out there and really change the culture around, you know, how the safety team is perceived, or really give some felt leadership and you know, visible leadership with good relationships with the crew on the floor. They've been empowered by the people above them. So they've been given that time, they're given the resources, or given the decision-making capability to do what they need to do. And this is the thing, I think there are a lot of fantastic leaders out there who want to do great work, want to create, you know, this fantastic team vibe and work on these issues, but they've got to have the ability to do that, and that comes from above. And so something we really drill down into in this book is the role of, from the board down, basically. I think that we send conflicting messages when, the safety team and frontline leaders bang on about safety all the time, but then what's in the annual report? Just the finances and what we're doing to make the business more profitable. That can send conflicting messages. There's a lot of there's a bit of a push from the Australian Institute of Company Directors and big people bodies like that, really showing that boards actually need to get really invested in understanding the culture and basically the experience of their workforce. Because if it's important to the board, it's important to everyone. And there's some great stories out there that I've been picking up on examples of that. If I can tell one briefly, one of the organisations we work with, a fantastic organisation, and they had a brilliant CEO who's been with them from the start. This CEO has made the company very people first oriented. They really care about the well-being of their people because they are in a high risk, challenging industry. And so they've really invested in building relationships across the very diverse team and building that high trust culture. Now, this CEO is unfortunately moving on, and they're in the process of getting another CEO. So they've gone out to a recruiter who's gotten some candidates together. And the board actually recognised there's a really good relationship between the board and the senior leaders. And the board recognised that this person did have such a positive impact on their culture and their organisation, and they don't want to lose that. So they actually consulted with the leaders and asked them, what do we need in a CEO? What are you looking for? What's the sort of person you want to work with? And actually relied on their expertise and their experience. So in doing that, the senior leadership team actually modified the position description and sent that back to the recruiters, who sent it on to the candidates. And the funny thing is, apparently a couple of those candidates actually pulled out of the race. They decided, it looks like they actually got feedback from one of the candidates, and they said, oh, it looks like this organization's into a whole lot of fluffy culture stuff. That's not for me. And, so this person is probably someone that likes to get in there and smash results and probably burn everyone in the process. But, so that the senior leaders recognize we just dodged a bullet by actually having the ability to say what matters to us and ensure that we get someone. The next CEO has to carry on that people first approach and that investment into well-being and resilience and everything. They've actually been able to, get someone that is going to be the right culture fit. So I think that's an example, a brilliant example of a board using what's in their control to actually ensure that they're creating a psychosocially safe environment for their workforce.
Yeah, that's awesome, Vanessa. And knowing that organisation as well is they've been very clear on what they want as well. I think the other part as well, they probably don't. This isn't always done across organisations, but it's a real opportunity in yes, here's what we're looking for from a cultural point of view, but it's helpful to attach that to some of those more typical performance indicators as well. I think particularly for those executives in those boards where they may not be as familiar or open to what this psychosocial space looks like, particularly if it's not yet legislated, is being able to go, we're trying to shift this, and this is what we're working to achieve, and here's the impact we anticipate it to have from a performance point of view, or here's the things that we look to expect to improve, decrease, whatever that might be. There's no shortage of stats and calculators that can be used to pull some of those metrics together to appeal to some of those considerations that some executives are driven by as well. So yeah.
Mm.
That's great. Picking up on a different question that's come through, looking at assessing psychosocial hazards, which Thiele, I'd love to throw to you in a minute, but acknowledging that we need to be aware of situations where there might be some more serious trust or sensitivities. where we might have had a breach in that psychosocial safety, and how do we then start to look at that? So assessing in this space is really important. My first thoughts in terms of looking at those trust and sensitivity issues probably sit around some of the examples that Vanessa was talking about there, that real participatory process. But if you're doing that in a way where, you know, in that example, they saw that their participation was taken on board, their thoughts, their ideas was then handed on to the recruiter. In the future, if you come to me and ask me for my thoughts on something, I'm going to have a level of trust and belief that you're going to use that in a useful, informative way in the future. So probably making a real attempt to acknowledge where those breaches of trust or sensitivities have come from in the past, and make a real effort to identify where things in the organization might be falling back into some of those patterns and really try and shift that focus. It's not going to be something that's going to change quickly or easily for an organization. It is something that's going to have to be worked on in a very dedicated, ongoing way for this organization if they do have those levels of sensitivities amongst this process. If you can get an external group to come in, and if that's communicated, you know, again, good change management process, good communication process, good participation processes in place with an external support to start to collate some of those issues, to really demonstrate that active, genuine leadership involvement in that process to help unpack that root cause. I think that can be a really good starting place there. But it does mean that you're going to have people that are open to listening to some of these past breaches and some of these past issues that might have occurred, and be willing to do something about it. And if you're not in a state where you've got that buy-in from your key stakeholders, your key senior leaders, you could actually do more harm than good pushing that process. So I think it is a very sensitive, takes quite a bit of care to do that well. But thinking more broadly about just assessing and understanding the different psychosocial hazards, Thiele, I'll throw over to you.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, I just wanted to reiterate to what you were saying, Amy, that if there have been those breaches of trust, it's really focusing on that repair first, because you're not going to get those good insights from then moving through to that risk assessment kind of process. Yeah, so in terms of, you know, how to assess those risks, it's really about consultation. We've said before that everyone experiences these psychosocial issues differently. So really understanding, what the workforce is experiencing, the severity of it. Is it an ongoing issue or a one-off? You know, are there other kind of historical root causes that we need to address? And that will help you with doing that assessment. Yeah, I'm not sure if Ben or Vanessa, did you have any thoughts on that one? Or?
Yeah, similar. I'm kind of leaning to, it makes me think there's a few questions around how do we ensure that, for instance, our incident investigation process is blame-free, and, you know, how do we ensure that we have psychosocial or psychological safety in the way that we do things. And again, I think it is about consultation and understanding the felt experience, because you could have a great process. We tend to, you know, putting in systems and processes is kind of easy because they're tangible and they make sense, and, you know, but the thing is, there could be a whole lot of, we've all been to a workplace where someone knows old mate 7 years ago that got a window seat after making a bad decision or something like that. There's always these stories in the culture, in the history of organizations. And so that could be the thing that, even though you have even though your intention is to have a learning approach as opposed to a blame approach, and what is the felt experience of incident reporting for the people that it happens to? And, you know, what is the banter around the water cooler around how that went, you know, because this is actually that makes all the difference between whether it's perceived as a blame-free, learning intervention, or whether it's seen as a witch hunt. So it's not just about having good processes, it's how do we communicate it? How do we demonstrate it? How do our leaders support people to understand the intention of investigations, for instance? All of this sort of thing. So yeah, I think we need to get closer to our people and understand how they're perceiving things. And, that's what this is all about. Yeah.
Yeah, and being aware of those stories that people tell, and I think we're in such an important turning space for organizations at the moment. People are starting to raise these issues that they might not have raised before. And what are they being met with? Are they being met with a harden up princess kind of a response? Because that's going to set your culture about this stuff going forward. Or are they being met with more openness? Are they being met with curiosity? You don't necessarily have to have all the answers straight away, but if you are approaching it with that learning mindset, if you are approaching it with the intention to understand, then you really can start to build the sort of culture that you'd like to have, rather than trying to work at it in a couple of years' time to undo some of the damage that can be done through those sorts of stories and those sorts of comments, because you're right, they do persist and they get told over and over again. Yeah.
I think on that one as well, Amy, is there's particularly if there's a distrust within the organisation, and often that's persisted through to some of those stories that can exist for a long time. Is organisations probably do need to look at what are the things that we can do that's not trying to do a massive big change or a massive big shift. What's something that we can do, or one or two things that's manageable that we might be able to do at a systematic level or within a particular business unit that's going to demonstrate that we are serious about this change. We are looking to make a meaningful impact, and that impact can be seen at a frontline level, but also it can be seen upwards as well to the executive and to the board. As well as you can see some organisations, and we have had some organisations go, look, we just want to make sure that we're ticking the box, and that's okay. I think ticking the box is okay, but there's just this incredible opportunity that goes beyond just ticking the box. And we kind of look at it that if you're going to tick the box, you may as well go further than that and try and create that thriving workplace. But in terms of looking at, where do we start? What do we need to do? It's looking at what are those things that is going to have an impact very early on, and that impact's going to be seen. And that might be a more difficult intervention to put in place, or a more difficult control to put in place, or a more difficult shift. But what are those things that are going to have impact that then the workforce sees that, okay, my organisation is serious about trying to shift the experience for people at work. It won't work necessarily for everyone, but they can start to see what that shift is looking like as well. And I was I think all of us, we enjoy plenty of podcasts out there, and I was hearing the organisation, especially a massive big organisation, is one of the things that they recognised in this podcast is that in terms of workload and manageable time and having capacity to do work, is just there was huge meeting overload that existed within the organisation. People were just not having time to do their work, so they had this. I think it might have been called, meeting doomsday or something like that. And I thought it's just really cool example where what they then did is any recurring meetings that existed in people's calendars, they just pulled out. They didn't exist from this date forward, and you couldn't put them back in for a certain time. And that was there to try and free up people's workload and reduce that, the high demands that existed on people's time. Now, it wouldn't work in all organizations necessarily, but a useful example of looking at what's something that we can do that, they would have been hearing, concerns or issues coming from the workplace around time, too many meetings, et cetera, et cetera. And so they put something in place that's going to have an impact on that, to try and build that trust with their people, rather than going, let's get a bowl of fruit in the kitchen, or let's get some gym memberships going out, and, those sorts of things as well. Is those things can actually create more distrust than they do trust. So actually looking at what's something that's going to have an impact, even though it might be more tricky for the organisation, it's going to have an impact on what we're trying to do here as well. Mindful of time, so I might. This is a question I'm going to actually throw sort of off the cuff here as well. Is and I'll throw Vanessa, you're just top right on my screen, so I'll throw to yourself to kick us off. Is what's and looking at where, for those organisations that are looking at this space, and I think I speak on behalf of a lot of stakeholders. It's a little bit like the skipping rope in the schoolyard for a lot of kids. You're just sort of trying to go. We want to jump in and get going, but we're not quite sure where to start or what to do. Where should organisations start? Where should stakeholders start? I know that's going to be different across different size organisations, but Vanessa, I'll throw to yourself, and then Tia, and then Amy. Where can organisations start in this space?
Yeah. Well, I think two things leap off the top of my head, and one is actually being interested in understanding the felt experience of your workers. So understanding that, physical, psychological, social element, and wanting to understand their experience. The other thing I would say is, if you're struggling to figure out which psychosocial hazards to manage and which controls to put in place, you can never go wrong with investing in leadership. When I look at the list of top psychosocial hazards, as job demands, role clarity, poor support, job control, poor organisational justice, leadership interacts with all of those things. And you can have a lot of difficult factors in your job role, but if you have a great leader as opposed to a not great one, it's going to make all the difference. And so I just think that really investing in leaders, particularly those frontline leaders, is always going to be helpful.
Fantastic.
Yeah, how about from yourself? Thanks, Vanessa.
Well, my mind goes to doing an assessment. So if you don't know where to start, you really want to understand what the current state is. We'd suggest doing an assessment of the culture as well as looking at the hazards, because that assessment of culture is going to give you that sense of leadership support and communication and within team support and perceptions of whether safety is prioritised and things like that. So they're all the factors that we need to make sure are going well in order to create that environment where people can thrive. And then looking at the hazards will also help you identify kind of key issues, key kind of exposure areas, so that if there's some key risks where you need to put in some controls straight away. So Amy, what about you?
I love both those answers. That's fantastic. I would probably throw in, one of the challenges that I think stops people from taking action is that sense of, and we've talked about it today, everyone's a little bit different. Everyone experiences the workplace a little bit differently. Everyone's coming in with their own set of resources and ability to cope with things and expectations and attitudes. And so I would ask people listening to flip that over and say, therefore, what you need to be doing is providing a range of controls, a range of supports, and thinking about how you might be able to not just understand that experience, but understand the different ways people might respond or cope, or the things they're going to need to deal with those different hazards, and make sure that you don't just have one thing available that's going to fix everything, but you actually are working on a whole range of different things. So we've talked about policies and procedures, absolutely important. Systems are going to be really important. Leadership's going to be really absolutely essential, as Vanessa was saying. But other things we haven't talked about, like EAP providers, like resources and training, like improving skills to do the job that you have, assessing those sorts of position descriptions and role clarity and things like that. A whole range of these things are going to come in and achieve change. And it's not a single one of those things on its own that's going to be able to do that. A good leader has to work within a good system. And so we need to be able to work on a whole range of different things. And the more we can work on just slowly improving and providing a variety of services, I think we're gonna do well in this space.
Yeah, awesome. I think that the one thing I'll add to that, and really appreciate your thoughts there, Vanessa, Tia, and Amy, is that executive buy-in and drive is just such a critical piece to this. And and we work with a lot of executive groups. We're running a lot of sort of executive sessions at the moment, board sessions, is there's some resistance, there's some not knowing, there's some confusion, there's some misinterpretation around what psychosocial safety is, and some, as I mentioned, there's some pushback around what that is and what that isn't, and even organisations going, well, we've got an EAP in place, or we run people through some resilience training, every 2 years, or we've got these things in place, is really challenging, inviting those executive groups to go, are we really driving this message that this is important for us as an organisation as well, because that's got to be seen at the executive level, it's got to be seen at the board level. An organisation working with a little while ago of looking at rolling out an intervention of developing leadership capability. It was interesting within some of that executive group to even just see some of the nuances in language that they're using, and you go, you're going to do that, you've got to start shifting the way that you're talking about it as well. Otherwise, that's almost wasted effort in some ways as well. So for stakeholders on the call, spending time, investing time with the executive team, with leaders, challenging some of those frames that might exist. It's not going to happen overnight, but investing in that time is going to set whatever you do later on up for success, in tenfold. So it's exciting. It's an opportunity for so many organisations. So we love having these conversations with clients and understanding what their dynamic is and some of the challenges that they're up against. So more than happy to continue those conversations outside of this discussion as well. Thank you very much, everyone, for jumping onto this call. I'm mindful we're at time, so we will call it here, because otherwise the four of us can talk, and I'm sure you've all got dinner plans later on today, so we won't impact upon those and keep going. So thank you very much for everyone for jumping in. There's a whole heap of questions that we didn't get to as well. So if you want to unpack those questions, by all means, feel free to get in contact with us, and happy to jump on a call. Likewise, we'll look at some of those questions for future conversations as well. Thank you very much, everyone. Wish you a safe and productive rest of your Thursday. Thanks, Vanessa. Thanks, Tia. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, everyone.